In this episode, we talk about the Indian Army putting under review a book written by one of its former chiefs. We also talk about the Maldives government suspending 3 deputy ministers after they made derogatory remarks against Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But first, we talk about Aditya L1, India's first mission to study the sun. Hi, I'm Rahil Philippos and you are listening to 3 Things, the Indian Express News Show. On Saturday, India's space agency ISRO made history once again when Aditya L1 successfully reached its designated destination. Launched on the 2nd of September, a couple of days after Chandrayaan-3 landed on the moon, Aditya L1 will now conduct observations of the sun for the next 5 years. Shortly after it placed itself on the Lagrange Point 1, a safe place between the Earth and the sun, ISRO Chairman S. Somnath addressed the media.
So that has been very precisely done. Ultimately, what we achieved today is exact placement based on our measurement and very correct prediction of the velocity requirement. The computer decided to cut off at the accelerometer-based cutoff has happened. So right now, it is in our calculation, it is in the right place.
Which is going to discover the mystery.
Aditya L1 is a landmark project for India, which aims to uncover previously unexplored and undiscovered information about the sun. To help us understand what makes this project so unique and what all ISRO plans to study through it, the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt joins my colleague Niharika Nanda in this segment.
Anonna, Aditya L1 was launched on 2nd of September, a couple of days after Chandrayaan-3 landed on the moon. What progress has it made so far?
So Aditya L1 achieved a very significant milestone on Saturday. It finally entered the orbit around the L1 point where it was intended to go. The L1 point is about 1% of the distance from the Earth to the Sun, and this is where the satellite will remain for at least 5 years and study the Sun.
Right. And for those who may not know, could you tell us a bit more about the L1 point?
So L1 or Lagrange point, if I'm not wrong in my pronunciation, but there are 5 such points between any 2 celestial objects. In this case, it's the Earth and the Sun. And these points are where the gravitational pull of both the bodies is such that it's perfectly balanced. So these are like parking spots in the space. If you place an orbit around these points, then they need very minimal fuel to remain in that orbit because the gravitational forces of both the celestial bodies keep them there. So that is why L1 point becomes very important. It gives the satellite a chance to remain there for a long duration with minimum fuel requirement. But what is more important is that this L1 point allows an unobstructed view of the sun. So it's a point where none of the other celestial bodies, say for example the moon or any other planets, cross by. So it's 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth and offers a direct view to the sun even during, say, times when on the Earth we would experience an eclipse. So this will allow us to study the sun 24/7. Secondly, there is a distorting effect that the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth's magnetic field, and the dust particles on Earth create on the inputs that we get from the sun from Earth. This is the reason why the study of sun from space will give us much better details as to what is happening on the surface of the sun and the solar corona.
Right. And has any mission been conducted to study the sun prior to this, or is Aditya L1 the first of its kind?
So when it comes to India, this is the first solar mission that we have. We have been studying the sun from, say, observatories on Earth. But this is the first space-based observatory to study the sun from India. However, there is at least one mission which was by NASA and the European Space Agency called SOHO, which was also sent to the L1 point. I think it was launched some 25 years ago, but it continues to remain in space and study the sun from there. However, when we talk about Aditya L1, it of course contains many more instruments which allows it to study the sun in much greater detail than just its, outer layer of the atmosphere, corona. It will study various phenomena such as the coronal mass ejections, the magnetic fields in space, and all of this together through its 7 payloads. So that's how it's different from SOHO.
Right. And Anonna, can you tell me why has ISRO chosen to focus on the sun through this mission? And what exactly do the scientists hope to learn about it?
So basically the main payload on board Aditya L1 is the VELC, which is meant to study the solar corona or the outer layer of the sun's atmosphere. Why it is important to study this solar corona is because of this phenomena that has confused scientists for years now. The solar corona is several times hotter than the surface of the sun, even though it is farther away from the reactions that are happening on the surface of the sun, which heats it. And even though it's hotter, it's not as bright as the surface of the sun. So what is the reason for this? This is something that the scientists will study with this payload. Other than that, also we are trying to study the explosive events that happen from the sun, like coronal mass ejections, which is important because it determines the space weather. And there have been instances where these sort of solar flares and CMEs can impact the satellites that we have. So it is essential that we study these, that we are able to predict these before they can damage our systems, especially when we are putting more and more satellites in space for various activities, from telecommunication to Earth observation and everything. So that is another important aspect of Aditya L1.
Also, Anonna, can you share with us why was placing Aditya L1 in its orbit more challenging than deploying any other satellite? And what would you say are the unique things that make Aditya L1 stand out?
So when it comes to Aditya L1, anyway, it is traveling a distance of 1.5 million kilometers. Now, it could be 1% of the distance to the sun, but none of our other spacecrafts have so far traveled this greater distance. Secondly, this is the second time after the Mangalyaan mission in 2014 that a spacecraft from India has left the Earth's sphere of influence. That is important. And the third most important point is that so far, all of our missions that have taken place, these satellites have been placed around a body. So, for example, the Earth observation satellites or the weather satellites, they are placed around the Earth. Then if you look at Chandrayaan missions, then the satellites are placed around the moon. And in Mangalyaan mission, it was placed around Mars. But so far, we've never had a mission where it had to be inserted around a point. So that is again unique with this mission. What is interesting about the mission is that it has 7 payloads which will study the sun. Initially, it was planned to be space observatory which would remain in the low Earth orbit. But later on, Dr. U.R. Rao actually was instrumental in changing the mission and saying that we would go to L1 point to study the sun. Why that is important is because other than, allowing this unobstructed view, it also ensures that the sun can be studied without the interference of the magnetic fields of the Earth, the atmosphere of the Earth, or the dust particles in the Earth, which, say, a ground-based telescope looking at the sun would face. So that is the mission.
And has Aditya L1 already started sending certain inputs or information about the sun?
So for now, there are a couple of measurements that have been sent by some of the payloads, not the main payload, from while it was journeying towards the L1 point. However, right now, after the spacecraft has reached its destination, scientists will now look at calibrating all the instruments and start collecting data about 2 weeks from now. That is what researchers are telling me. When it comes to VELC, which is the main payload for Aditya L1, the main primary mirror of the instrument the aperture for it is still closed, and it will remain closed for about 2 weeks to allow for all the dust around the dust particles around the spacecraft to settle, after which it will start taking measurements. So we should start getting very good data, within a couple of months from all the instruments. And this data would be accessible not only to scientists in India, but also to international scientists studying the sun.
And finally, Anonna, you are someone who has been tracking the project closely. What are the things about Aditya L1 that you find the most interesting?
The interesting thing is that ISRO has been trying a lot of new things. Aditya L1 is a mission which hasn't been attempted so far. The trajectory is such that it hasn't been done for any of our other missions so far. So it's new in that way, along with, of course, the scientific payloads. But I think for me, the most exciting bit is that ISRO is doing a lot more new things when it comes to space missions, be it like Gaganyaan mission, which will happen in the next couple of years, or setting up a space observatory. So there's a lot more of these scientific and exploratory missions that ISRO is undertaking.
And next we talk about a book written by a former army chief. This week, the Indian Army began reviewing a memoir by its former chief, General MM Naravane. The book, which is titled 4 Stars of Destiny, was initially slated for release later this month. Now, the Army's review comes a month after excerpts from the book were published by news agency Press Trust of India. In his memoir, Naravane offers insights into India's military standoff with China in eastern Ladakh that started in 2020, including details about the Galwan Valley clashes and the Agnipath recruitment scheme. And so, due to the sensitive subject matter, the Army has initiated a review of the book, and the Ministry of Defence is also reported to be involved in the process at some level. The Indian Express's Amrita Nayak Datta, who writes on defense and national security for the paper, joins us in this segment to talk about why the book is being reviewed by the Army and if retired armed forces personnel are allowed to write books like these in the first place. So, Amrita, what are some of the big revelations that Naravane has made in this book?
So yes, Rahel, excerpt from this memoir, that is 4 Stars of Destiny, written by former Army Chief General Naravane. They were published by news agency Press Trust of India just last month. And what happened was the excerpt showed what they revealed were a communication between him and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, which was on August 31, 2020, when the Chinese were moving tanks and men stretching in eastern Ladakh, where India and China has been locked in a military standoff since May 2020. So as per the PTI report, he recalls that, there was a flurry of phone calls, there was a tight situation, and there were different thoughts that were flashing through his mind at that time. And that's when he was conveyed by the top brass that it was supposed to be a military decision. And whatever he had to do, he had to do. So he was given a task.
Yeah, he writes that they told him, quote, "Jo uchit samjho wo karo." I had been handed a hot potato with this carte blanche. The onus was now totally on me. I took a deep breath and sat silently for a few minutes. All was quiet save for the ticking of the wall clock, unquote.
So, yes, and the book also talks about other things like the deadly Galwan Valley clashes which killed 20 Indian soldiers. It spoke about a very revolutionary recruitment scheme for the military, the Agnipath scheme that was brought in last year to recruit soldiers, airmen and sailors into the defense services. So, yes, a couple of these things primarily are what we get to know from the excerpts that were released by PTI.
Right. And Amrita, we know that the Army has initiated a review of the book, but do we know what exactly prompted the review?
So we don't know exactly what prompted the review, but yes, definitely Eastern Ladakh has been in boil at that time. And these are things that nobody had spoken about before. So he is the one, as the former army chief of the Indian Army, General Naravane brought it out. He threw the insight for the first time of what was exactly happening in Eastern Ladakh through 2020 after the Galwan Valley clashes, when both soldiers were tense, the tensions were high, there was a military standoff going on. So what exactly was the situation that was there in eastern Ladakh? This kind of insight has not come out in the past. So when the excerpts sort of brought out this, that's when the army decided to carry out a review. Which particular incident or which particular bit pointed out that, we do not know. I assume it is the overall subject.
Right, but Amrita, what are the rules in place as far as memoirs by armed forces personnel are concerned? Are they permitted to write books about subjects that are this sensitive in nature?
So Rahel, currently serving officers of the armed forces, they are governed by specific rules when they are to publish a book. But this matter is definitely a grey area for retired officers. Like for instance, Rule 21 of the Army Rules 1954, it states that no person will publish a book or communicate to the press directly or indirectly any matter that is related to a service subject. So for this, it needs a prior permission. And however, this may not apply to them. It may not apply to the officers if they're writing a book which is purely of a fiction or of a literary or artistic nature. So this may not apply to them in that case. But in case they're writing a book where the subject is related to field they are working in that case, a prior government sanction or prior approvals are needed. So the Army Rule 21 clearly mentions that. But having said that, as I just said, there are no specific rule for officers who retired from service. There was a rule, there was this amended Central Civil Services Pension Rules 1972. They were amended in June 2021 by the DOPT. These rules had barred retired government servants who had served in intelligence or security related organization from publishing any information that is related to the organization after their retirement without prior permission. Now, these are the Central Civil Services Pension Rules, so they definitely do not apply to the defense services. But some sources who I spoke to, they said that similar rules would ideally apply to the armed forces personnel. But having said that, this is a grey area. There is no fixed rule. But given that these rules talk about retired government servants who've served in a security-related organization and the defense services are again related to the security and defense of the nation, so this would have applied. They would have drawn a parallel to these rules. But there is no rule in pen and paper as such.
Right. And how have General Naravane and the book's publishers reacted to the review?
So yes, General Naravane responded to us by saying that it is up to the publishers to say whether any of this thing. He did not respond to our specific queries, but he said that the publishers who can actually say whether because of this vetting process that is going on, there will be a delay or not. So they are apparently, supposed to be in touch with the media and they are expected to communicate on the same. And when it comes to the publishers, we did send them an email and there was a response from them. Mili Aishwarya, publisher, Penguin Random House, she responded to our query on an email. She said that they carefully review all books written by active or retired professional to ensure quality content. And this process may impact publishing timelines based on the necessary work. And she also said that as part of the editorial process, they are scheduled to publish his book in 2024 and they are diligently working towards meeting that timeline. So this was the exact response. So she did admit that there could be this process, all the review process, it might impact some publishing timelines based on the necessary work.
Right. And Amrita, army officers have written books in the past as well. Do they always undergo a review of this kind?
So Rahel, we do not know it for sure since this is a grey area for retired officers. But I assume, to my knowledge, it depends on case to case. Every individual case is different. If there is a need where there is a lot of security related information that is going on in a book, then in that case it would have gone for a vetting. Whereas in cases where the information would have been literally or a sort of generic, then it might not have gone. So there are no specific rules that it has to be done, but it would have depended on a case by case basis.
And in the end, we talk about Maldives. On Sunday, the Maldives government suspended 3 deputy ministers after they took to social media to make derogatory remarks against Prime Minister Narendra Modi, according to local media Atul Times. The 3 suspended ministers are Mariam Shiona, Malsha Sharif, and Mezum Majid. In a statement, the government said the government of Maldives is aware of derogatory remarks on social media platforms against foreign leaders and high-ranking individuals. These opinions are personal and do not represent the views of the government of Maldives. Earlier, Maldives Deputy Minister of Youth Empowerment, Mariam Shuna, had made disparaging comments against Modi on social media platform X. Shuna's now deleted post featured photos of PM Modi from his recent visit to Lakshadweep, along with a text that read, "What a clown, the puppet of Israel, Mr. Narendra Diver with life jacket. Hashtag visit Maldives, hashtag sunny side of life," the post said. She also compared India to cow dung. These comments drew condemnation from former Maldivian President Mohammad Nasheed, who was seen to be more India-friendly than the current administration. Nasheed called the statement appalling and said that the current government must distance itself from these comments and give clear assurance to India they do not reflect government policy. Another deputy minister, a colleague of Shuna, Malsha Sharif, made similar derogatory comments against India and the tourism campaign in the Maldives. These posts, along with others by prominent politicians and leaders, instigated other users into posting a wide range of racist remarks against Indians and Indian tourists who travel to the Maldives. Meanwhile, the former Vice President of Maldives, Ahmad Adib, commented on the matter, saying that the statement was not acceptable.
It was not acceptable. I would say there has to be more strong action to be taken, and also I personally called up to the ministers I know, and they have given me assurance that they will be suspended, and I hope they will take more action on them, because and I hope they resign themselves as well, because the damage is we cannot even measure it. Already the damage has been done, and we should respond with strong action so that this will not be repeated ever.
PM Modi's visit to Maldives and his social media posts documenting it have led to a social media battle among Maldivian politicians and government officials. Also, following the derogatory remarks by Maldivians, Indian social media users used the hashtag boycott Maldives and vowed to refrain from traveling to Maldives for their vacations. It is also worth noting that this development comes nearly 2 months after the Maldives government, headed by Mohammad Muizzu, who is seen to be closer to China, had formally requested the Indian government to withdraw its military personnel stationed at the island nation. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was written and produced by me, Rahil Philippos, Niharika Nanda and Shashank Bhargav. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.